The gallery was buzzing, a sea of black dresses and champagne flutes. It was the biggest night of my life. Then, through the crowd, I saw them. My daughter, Jessica, and her husband, Mark. They looked like ghosts from another life, their faces pale with a desperation that didn't belong here. He pushed his way towards me, his eyes scanning the room with a mix of awe and resentment. He leaned in, his voice a harsh whisper that cut right through the noise. "We need to talk," he hissed. "You owe us that much." I felt nothing, just a quiet, cold calm, the kind of peace you earn after years of silent suffering. But that explosion was just the final crack in a foundation that had been crumbling for years. That crumbling foundation had been built on what I thought was solid ground, back when our lives were small and our happiness was simple. It started with a sound, the sharp crack of cheap ceramic hitting a linoleum floor. My daughter Jessica couldn't have been more than 10. She stood in the kitchen, tears welling in her big brown eyes, looking down at her favorite World's Best Mom mug, now in 2 clean pieces. We didn't have money to just go out and buy a new one. Back then every dollar was earmarked for groceries or the electric bill, so I did what I always did. I found a way to fix it. I sat at the kitchen table with some glue from the hardware store and a little tube of gold paint from a craft kit. I told her the story I'd read about an ancient art where things weren't just repaired, they were made more beautiful because they had been broken. As I carefully pieced the mug back together and traced the crack with a shimmering gold line, her tears dried up. She looked at it with pure wonder. "It's not broken anymore," she whispered. "It's special." For years that mug sat on her dresser, a symbol of our ability to make something precious out of our struggles. That was before Mark. Jessica met Mark in college, and he was everything I wasn't. He was polished, ambitious, and came from a family where they never had to glue their own mugs back together. At first, I was happy for her. He had a plan, a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan. My only plan had ever been to make it to the next payday. But little by little, I started to notice the subtle shift. My daughter, who used to find beauty in our patched-together life, started seeing only the patches. The first time I felt it sting was at a backyard barbecue at their new house, the one with the perfect lawn and the stainless steel grill that cost more than my car. I'd spent a week mending a beautiful ceramic planter I'd found at a garage sale, tracing its cracks with my signature gold. I thought it would look perfect on their new deck. I watched from the kitchen window as Mark picked it up, a confused smirk on his face. "Did your mom find this in a dumpster?" I heard him ask his friend. Jessica just laughed, a tight, nervous sound, and whisked the planter away before anyone else could see it. I never saw it again. It was a slow burn, the way they chipped away at me. The insults got dressed up as concern. My hobby of mending broken things became an unhealthy obsession. My little house, once a cozy sanctuary, was now cluttered. The real turning point, the moment I knew I was losing her, happened in the sprawling aisle of a Costco. I'd offered to go with her to help with my grandson, Timmy. It was our Saturday ritual. But that day, she hesitated on the phone. "You know, Mom, it's a madhouse in there. And your car is so, full of stuff. It's probably better if I just handle it." The excuse was so flimsy it was transparent. She didn't want the other moms from her perfect suburban neighborhood, the wives of executives and doctors, to see her with her mother, the woman who showed up in a decade-old sedan with a trunk full of broken pottery. I spent more and more time in my garage. It became my sanctuary. The world outside felt cold and judgmental, but in there, surrounded by what others considered garbage, I felt at peace. I wasn't just fixing pots. I was healing something inside myself. I taught myself chemistry, ordering resins and mica powders online. I filled notebooks with formulas, testing different temperatures, different bonding agents. I was searching for the perfect alchemy, a gold that was not just beautiful but impossibly strong. My little workshop was my entire world. It was there, under the dim light of a single bare bulb, that I finally perfected it. A formula for a golden lacquer that was stronger and more brilliant than anything on the market. In my worn-out notebook, I drew a circle around the final equation and wrote a single word: Eureka. It was a quiet victory no one else in the world knew about. The final crack in our foundation happened 5 years ago. They showed up at my door, their faces grim. They called it an intervention. Mark did most of the talking, using words like compulsive behavior and hoarding. He said they were worried about my lifestyle. He walked into my garage, my sacred space, and gestured to my carefully organized shelves of finished pieces. "All this junk, Carol," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "It has to go. We're here to help you clean up." He reached for a box of my most intricate work. I stepped in front of him. "Don't you touch that," I said, my voice low and shaking. That's when Jessica stepped forward, her face a mask of strained pity. "Mom, please," she begged. "Stop being so difficult. For once in your life, can't you just be normal?" Normal. After all the years I had spent turning broken into beautiful, she looked at me and all she wanted was for me to be normal. That was the moment my daughter died, and a stranger took her place. I said nothing. I just stared at her until they grew uncomfortable and left. That was the last time we spoke. And now, here they were, standing in the middle of my gallery, surrounded by the very junk they had tried to throw away. Each piece on the walls, bathed in soft light, was a testament to the life I had built from the shards of the one they had tried to shatter. I looked at their worn-out shoes on the polished concrete floor, at the desperation in my daughter's eyes, and I felt that same quiet, cold calm wash over me. I had already survived the worst they could do. This was nothing. This was nothing. It was just a conversation, and words had lost their power to hurt me long ago. I led them away from the main floor, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses fading behind us. We found a quiet alcove, a small private space with 2 leather chairs facing a single piece of art on the wall, a large shattered ceramic plate I had painstakingly reassembled, its web of golden cracks gleaming under a spotlight, a self-portrait of sorts. I remained standing, a silent signal that this was not a visit, this was an arraignment. They sat, sinking into the chairs, looking smaller than I had ever seen them. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the gallery's climate control. Jessica stared at the floor, tracing the pattern of the polished concrete with her worn-out shoe. Mark cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet. He was the one to speak, of course. He had always been the speaker, the planner, the one who dictated the terms of their lives and of my exile. "Mom," he began, and the word felt so foreign in his mouth, like an antique he'd pulled out of a dusty box, unsure of its value. He'd never called me that, not once in 15 years. It was always Carol. I know it's been a while. A while. 5 years of silence, 12 years of a slow, deliberate amputation. A while. I didn't respond. I just watched, my stillness a counterpoint to his fidgeting. He ran a hand through his thinning hair and adjusted the collar of his slightly too tight polo shirt, a relic from a more prosperous time. "Look," he said, shifting gears from feigned warmth to rehearsed sincerity. "There's no easy way to say this. We're in trouble. Big trouble." He launched into the story, a cascading tale of woe that I'm sure they had practiced in the car on the long drive out here. He talked about his investment fund, the one he used to boast about at family gatherings I was no longer invited to. He used a lot of jargon, market volatility, leveraged assets, a cascading failure. It was a fancy way of saying he'd gambled and lost. He'd bet the farm, and the farm was gone. "It all happened so fast," Jessica murmured, finally looking up. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but I couldn't tell if the tears were from genuine sorrow or just exhaustion. One day, everything was fine, and the next, the letters started coming. From the bank. She choked on the last word. "We're in foreclosure, Mom. They're taking the house." The house. The one with the perfect lawn. The one where my gift was hidden away in shame. The one my grandson was supposed to grow up in, making memories without his grandmother. I felt a flicker of something, but it wasn't pity. It was a cold, sharp sense of irony. They had built that perfect house as a fortress to keep people like me out, and now the walls were crumbling around them. "We've lost everything," Mark continued, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, as if we were partners in this tragedy. "The savings, the 401k, all of it. I'm looking for work, but at my age, in this economy, it's tough. No one's hiring." I thought of myself, at his age, standing on my feet for 10 hours a day in a cold garage, my hands raw from resin and dust. I thought about the 3 part-time jobs I'd juggled for years after my husband died, the sheer grinding effort it took just to keep the lights on. Tough, He had no idea what tough was. Jessica picked up the narrative baton. Her part was the emotional plea. "It's Timmy I'm worried about," she said, her voice cracking. "He doesn't understand. He asks why we have to move, why all of Daddy's work friends don't come over anymore. We had to pull him out of his soccer league because we couldn't afford the fees." This was the dagger they'd saved for me. My grandson. The boy I only knew from blurry photos on her social media, the ones I had to view from a fake account I'd created, like a spy on my own family. They knew he was my weak spot, the one regret that still had the power to ache. They were counting on that ache. They were leveraging it, just like Mark had leveraged his assets. They were a well-oiled machine. I had to give them that. He presented the financial ruin. She presented the emotional fallout. He was the head. She was the heart. Both working together to execute a single, desperate plan. To get my money. "We have nowhere to go," Mark said, laying his final card on the table. "Her parents can't help. My parents are on a fixed income. You're our only hope." He gestured vaguely at the gallery around us, at the life I had built from the dust of my old one. His eyes, for the first time, held a flicker of something that looked like respect, but it wasn't. It was the look a starving man gives a banquet. It wasn't about admiration, it was about consumption. I remained silent, letting their words hang in the air. I let the weight of their failure and desperation fill the space between us. In their story, they were the victims of circumstance, of a cruel market and bad luck. There was no mention of the years of living beyond their means, the 2 brand-new SUVs in the driveway, the lavish vacations to places I'd only ever seen in magazines. In their narrative, they were blameless. Their bankruptcy was a thing that had happened to them, not a destination they had driven to at high speed. Finally, after the silence had stretched long enough to become its own statement, I spoke. My voice was even, devoid of the anger they expected, the pity they hoped for. "What is it you want? Hejdas very do no provage, hejden k snown in the gram to the fails." The question seemed to surprise them with its directness. Mark blinked. "Well," he stammered, "we need help, to get back on our feet, a loan, just to stop the foreclosure and give us some breathing room." Jessica leaned forward, her hands clasped together in a prayer-like gesture. "We'll pay it all back, Mom, every single penny, I swear it. This has been a wake-up call for us. We've realized what's important. Family. That's what's important. Family." She spoke the word as if she were the first to discover it. She offered it to me like a gift, expecting me to be grateful. After all those years when the word meant nothing, when I was an inconvenient footnote in the story of their perfect life, now, in their hour of need, I was family again. How convenient, how convenient. The word echoed in the quiet of my mind. Family. A key to a lock they had thrown away years ago, now desperately trying to jam it into my new front door. I let the silence hang in the air, a heavy blanket smothering their desperate, flimsy words. I watched the hope in Jessica's eyes curdle into confusion, then fear. Mark shifted in his chair, the leather groaning under his unease. They had expected tears, anger, maybe even a reluctant lecture. They were not prepared for the calm. They were not prepared for me. I finally moved, my footsteps soft on the polished concrete. "Let me show you something," I said, my voice even. It wasn't a request. I turned and walked towards the center of the alcove, to the single illuminated piece on the wall behind them. The large, shattered plate, its beautiful, chaotic web of gold veins shimmering under the light. They turned, following my gaze, their expressions blank. To them, it was just another piece of abstract art, something for rich people to talk about at cocktail parties. "This piece," I began, my voice as quiet as the room, "is called The Hoarder's Gift." The artist is a woman from a small town in Ohio. A woman whose family told her she was obsessed with garbage. They told her to be normal. I saw a flicker of recognition in Jessica's eyes, a shadow of a memory. Mark just looked impatient, annoyed by this little art history lesson while his life was burning down. "This woman," I continued, tracing one of the golden lines with my finger, never taking my eyes off the piece, spent years in her garage, surrounded by what other people threw away. She believed that anything could be mended, that the cracks were what made things beautiful, but she needed a special kind of gold, something strong. Something that would not just fill the cracks, but bond the broken pieces together, making them stronger than they were before. I paused, letting the story settle. So she invented it. She spent years perfecting a formula for a golden bonding agent. An adhesive so unique, so revolutionary in its composition, that it's now used by the most prestigious art restoration houses in the world. The Getty, the Smithsonian, it turned out to be worth millions. I finally turned to face them. Their faces were pale, caught between confusion and a dawning, horrifying comprehension. "The junk you told me to throw away, Mark? The garbage you wanted to help me clean up? You're standing in the gallery it paid for." That was the reveal. Not an explosion of anger, but a quiet, simple statement of fact. It landed in the room with the force of a physical blow. Jessica's mouth fell open. All the color drained from Mark's face, leaving behind a sickly gray pallor. The rehearsed story, the practiced tears, the entire strategy, it all evaporated in an instant, replaced by the raw, ugly truth. They hadn't come to see their long-lost mother. They had come, by sheer pathetic coincidence, to beg for money from the very source they had once so thoroughly despised. That's... Mark stammered, unable to form a complete sentence. He looked from the gleaming plate on the wall to my face, his mind racing, trying to recalibrate a world that had just been turned upside down. Jessica started to cry, but this time, the tears were different. They weren't the soft, manipulative tears from before. These were harsh, ragged sobs of genuine shock. The sound was ugly. The sound was real. "So you see," I said, my voice still level, still calm, "I understand what it's like to have your world fall apart. I understand what it's like to lose everything." I took a step closer. "And I also understand the value of building something for yourself, something strong, something no one can take away from you." This was it. This was the moment their desperate hope hinged on. Mark's eyes were wide now, a new calculation dawning. The source of my wealth didn't matter, only its existence. "Carol, Mom," he tried again, his voice thick with a new kind of manufactured awe. That's incredible. We had no idea. This changes everything. You can help us. It would be nothing to you, a drop in the bucket." The shamelessness of it was almost impressive. "Yes," I said, "it changes everything." I let that hang in the air for a beat. It changes my answer from no to absolutely not. The two words hit him like a slap. "What? What are you talking about?" He sputtered. "We're your family. Your daughter, your grandson, they're going to be homeless." "My family," I repeated, the words tasting like ash. "My family decided, 5 years ago, that I was an embarrassment, that my life's work was junk. You didn't want me then, when I had nothing but my hands and my heart to offer. Why should I want you now, when all you have to offer is your hands, held out, asking for a piece of my success?" I turned my attention to my daughter, who was now staring at me, her face a mess of tears and disbelief. "You asked me to be normal, Jessica," I said softly, "and I've finally become what you wanted. A normal person protects what they've built. A normal person doesn't set themselves on fire to keep others warm, especially not those who push them out into the cold. My peace, this life, it's the most valuable thing I own. I will not be trading it for the chaos and poison that you two create wherever you go." That's when Mark's true nature, the one that had been hiding behind a thin veneer of civility, finally exploded. The mask didn't just slip, it shattered. "You selfish bitch," he spat, getting to his feet. The word echoed in the quiet gallery. "After everything, we were trying to help you. You were a pathetic hoarder living in filth. And now you get lucky, you win the lottery, and you think you're better than us? But it's down never." He took a step towards me, his face twisted in a mask of pure rage. "You owe us. That money should be our son's inheritance. He's your grandson. You would let your own blood suffer just to gloat?" I didn't flinch. I just looked at him, and then I looked at my daughter, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something new in her eyes. She was staring at her husband, at this ranting, entitled man, as if seeing him for the very first time. She saw the poison, the sheer, unadulterated ugliness that she had allowed to dictate her life, to sever her from her own mother. The illusion of her perfect husband and her perfect life was cracking right before my eyes, and a web of ugly, jagged lines was spreading across its surface. and there was no gold in the world that could ever mend it. There was no gold in the world that could ever mend it. Jessica stared at her husband, this stranger screaming in the hallowed quiet of the gallery, and I watched as 15 years of carefully constructed denial crumbled to dust in a single, ugly moment. She didn't say a word. To him or to me. She simply stood up, turned, and walked out of the alcove. She didn't look back. Her movements were slow, robotic, like someone walking away from a car wreck. Mark stood there, his rant cut short, his mouth still hanging open. His rage faltered, replaced by a flash of panic. He had not only lost the argument, he had lost his audience. He shot me one last look of pure, undiluted hatred, then turned and scurried after his wife, his illusion of power gone, leaving nothing but the faint, sour smell of his desperation in the air. I didn't watch them go. I turned back to the beautiful, broken plate on the wall. I reached out and gently traced one of its golden veins. I had built a life, a fortune, a world, out of celebrating the beauty of repair. But the most important lesson I had learned was this. You cannot mend something that does not want to be whole, and you cannot force someone to value the pieces they were so determined to throw away. I took a deep breath, the air clean and cool, and walked back into the warmth and light of the party, back to the life that was truly mine. Weeks later, the crisp, clean air of Santa Fe filled my new studio. The high desert sun streamed through the large warehouse windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing over the long wooden workbenches. I was surrounded by the gentle sounds of concentration, the soft scrape of a tool, the quiet hum of a polishing wheel, the low murmur of conversation. I wasn't alone in my workshop anymore. I was teaching a class, sharing my art with a group of women, each of them mending something of their own. My phone buzzed on the bench beside me. I glanced down. It was a text from an unknown number, but I knew who it was from. Mom, I left him. I'm in therapy. I'm learning to fix things too. I hope one day you'll let me show you. I read the words once, then twice. I thought of the scared, broken woman who had walked out of the gallery. A part of me, the mother that never truly dies, felt a pang of something, but it wasn't the old desperate ache. It was a distant sadness, a quiet hope for her, for the long road she had ahead of her. She was finally trying to find her own gold. I put the phone down, screen facing down on the rough wood. I didn't reply. My healing was no longer tied to hers. My peace was not a prize she could win back. It was a fortress I had built, brick by painful brick. I picked up a small, shattered porcelain bowl and my finest brush. Dipping it into the warm, liquid gold, I drew a steady, brilliant line, joining two broken pieces together. I had learned that some things, once broken, could be made even stronger and more beautiful, but I had also learned that the most precious things are the ones you choose not to mend, but to release. So let me ask you, if your life shattered into 1,000 pieces, would you have the courage to pick up the ones that truly mattered and build something even more beautiful? If this story resonated with you, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in the hardest of times. After the front door clicked shut, the silence in the house was louder than their yelling had been. Every tick of the clock on the wall, every hum from the old refrigerator, was an accusation. I stood in the middle of my living room, the carpet suddenly feeling like foreign soil. My daughter's final words echoed in the empty space, chipping away at the very foundation of who I was. For once, can't you just be normal? Normal. A normal mother has pictures of her grandchildren on the mantelpiece. A normal mother gets invited to Thanksgiving. A normal mother's phone rings. Mine had been silent for so long I sometimes forgot to charge it. For days I just drifted. I'd make a cup of tea and forget to drink it. I'd sit in front of the television and not register a single image. The house, once my cozy sanctuary, felt like a museum of my failure. Every corner held a ghost of a memory, Jessica's height marked in pencil on a doorframe, a faint stain on the rug from where she'd spilled grape juice as a toddler. My own home was actively trying to break my heart. I don't know what finally drew me out to the garage. Maybe it was the fact that there were no memories of her out there. It was my space, cold, cluttered, and completely my own. The air smelled of dust, damp concrete, and the faint, sharp tang of the resins I used. It smelled like work. It smelled like purpose. I ran my hand over a workbench cluttered with broken things, a stack of chipped plates from a thrift store, a ceramic bird with a broken wing, a terracotta pot that had fallen in a storm. They were all waiting for me. They were all like me, cast aside and deemed worthless. At first, the work was just a way to make my hands busy so my mind could be quiet. I'd sit for hours under the harsh light of a single bare bulb, the rest of the world fading away. There was a rhythm to it. The careful cleaning of the shards, the patient mixing of the epoxy, the steady hand required to lay a piece back in its place. It was a meditation. With every piece I mended, I felt a tiny fissure in my own spirit being filled. But it wasn't enough. The repairs were fragile. The gold paint I used was just that paint, a pretty lie hiding a weakness. It was a cosmetic fix, and I was tired of cosmetic fixes. That's when the obsession truly took hold. It wasn't about a hobby anymore, it became a mission. I wanted to create something that didn't just hide the break, but made the object stronger for having been broken. I wanted to create a gold that was more than just beautiful, it had to be indestructible. My days took on a new shape. I'd wake up before dawn, my mind already churning with chemical compounds and drying times. The public library became my second home. I, a woman who never finished community college, was suddenly devouring textbooks on polymer chemistry and metallurgy. The librarians knew me by name, setting aside books they thought I'd find interesting. I turned my kitchen into a makeshift laboratory, my oven used for curing resins instead of baking cookies. My nights were spent at the workbench in the garage, testing formulas. I filled dozens of notebooks with my frantic scrawls, pages of failures, batches that were too brittle, that dried, cloudy, that wouldn't bond. I failed hundreds of times. Each failure was a fresh wave of despair. There were nights I'd just sit on the cold concrete floor, surrounded by my ugly, botched experiments, and allow myself to cry. I was a foolish old woman in a garage, chasing an impossible idea, wasting what little money I had on resins and powdered metals. Mark's voice would echo in my head, obsessed with garbage, and I'd wonder if he was right. But then the sun would rise, and the stubborn part of me, the part that had survived widowhood and poverty and loneliness, would force me back to my feet. I learned to see my failures not as endings, but as data. I became a scientist. I was methodical. I documented everything: the temperature of the garage, the humidity, the exact ratio of every component, my grief, my rage, my profound loneliness. I poured all of it into the work. It became the heat that fueled my forge. The breakthrough came on a cold Tuesday in October. I was almost out of my last batch of Japanese lacquer, the most expensive ingredient. I had a hunch, something I'd read in an old industrial chemistry journal about cross-linking polymers. It was a long shot. My hands were steady as I measured out the components, my movements precise from thousands of hours of practice. I mixed them together. The color was different this time. Richer. The texture was smoother, like liquid silk. It felt different. It felt right. I mended a simple, thick piece of stoneware, a plate that had been broken in half. I applied the new formula, clamped it, and left it to cure for 24 hours. It was the longest day of my life. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I just kept walking out to the garage, staring at the clamped plate, a ridiculous prayer on my lips. The next afternoon, I unclamped it. The golden seam was flawless, glowing with an inner light. It was beautiful, but that wasn't the test. I held the plate in my hands, my heart pounding. I took a deep breath, and with all my strength, I tried to break it again along the same line. Nothing. I put it on the concrete floor and stood on it. The ceramic groaned under my weight, but the golden seam held firm. I picked it up and struck it against the edge of the workbench. The plate shattered into a dozen new pieces, but the original golden line, the one I had created, remained perfectly, impossibly intact. I sank to my knees, holding the proof in my hands. A quiet, tearless sob escaped my throat. It was a sound of relief, of vindication, of a profound and solitary triumph. I had done it. I hadn't just fixed a plate. I had defeated the break itself. I walked back to my workbench, picked up my pen, and in my stained, dog-eared notebook, I drew a circle around the final formula, and in the space beside it, I wrote one word: Eureka. That single word, Eureka, was a silent thunderclap in the solitude of my garage. It was the moment a key turned in a lock I didn't even know existed. It was the beginning of everything. But to understand the lock, you have to understand the cage I was in. You have to understand the day they came to tell me I was living my life all wrong. It was a Thursday afternoon, gray and overcast, the kind of day that already felt like a sigh. The doorbell rang, a sound so rare it made me jump. I peered through the peephole and my heart did a foolish little leap. It was Jessica and Mark. It had been months since they'd come by, months of unanswered calls and polite vague text messages. Hope, that stubborn weed, pushed its way through the cracks in my certainty. Maybe this was it. Maybe they missed me. I opened the door with a smile that felt rusty from disuse. It died on my lips when I saw their faces. They weren't smiling. They stood on my porch with the grim, practiced solemnity of a funeral director and his apprentice. "Hi, Mom," Jessica said, her voice thin. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "Carol," Mark said, nodding curtly. "We need to talk. Can we come in?" This was no independently and its tanned a vision to the melody why. They walked into my living room and stood stiffly in the middle of the rug, as if they were afraid to touch anything. I offered them coffee, tea, my hands fluttered with the old, forgotten gestures of hospitality. Mark waved a dismissive hand. "We're not staying long. Please, just sit." They sat opposite me on the sofa, a matched set of judges. I sat in my favorite armchair, the worn fabric suddenly feeling thin and shabby under their gaze. I clutched my lukewarm mug of tea like a life raft. Mark cleared his throat and began. "Carol, Jessica and I are here because we're concerned. We're very, very concerned about you." "SARS, in the company spitting." He spoke in a calm, condescending tone, the one a person uses on a toddler or a lunatic. He used words he'd probably looked up online, words like hoarding tendencies and unhealthy attachment to inanimate objects. He talked about the state of my house, the clutter, the mess. I looked around my cozy living room, at the stacks of books I was reading, the half-finished blanket I was knitting, the small mended ceramics I'd placed on the bookshelves. It wasn't a mess, it was a life. But in his eyes, it was a diagnosis. "We think," he said, leaning forward as if sharing a great secret, "that this hobby of yours has become something more. It's an obsession. It's not healthy for you to be surrounded by all this brokenness." I looked at Jessica, my own daughter, hoping for a sign of protest, a flicker of the girl who used to see magic in a repaired mug. There was nothing. She just sat there, her hands knotted in her lap, staring at a spot on the floor, nodding along to her husband's every word. She was a ghost in my living room. "We're here to help," he finally said, his voice taking on a new, brighter tone. This was the action plan. "We're going to help you clean up, get rid of all this junk, a fresh start." Before I could even process the audacity of it, he stood up and walked toward the garage, the one place that was truly mine. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Mark, don't," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He ignored me. I followed him, a trespasser in my own home. He flicked on the light, and the single bulb illuminated my world. My workbenches, my tools, my shelves lined with finished pieces, each one a testament to hours of patience and care. He surveyed the room with an expression of profound distaste. "See?" he said to Jessica, who had followed us and now stood hesitating at the doorway. "This is what I'm talking about. It's a sickness." He strode over to a sturdy cardboard box on my main workbench. It was where I kept my best work, the pieces with the most intricate repairs, the ones I was most proud of. He picked up the box. "This is Exhibit A," he said with a triumphant smirk. "Let's start here." He turned and started walking toward the large plastic trash can in the corner. Something inside me snapped. I moved, faster than I thought I could, and stood directly in his path. "You will not touch that," I said. My voice wasn't a whisper anymore. It was low, and it was shaking with a rage I hadn't felt in years. "You will put that box down and you will get out of my garage." He actually laughed. "Carol, don't be dramatic. We're doing this for your own good." "Put it down," I repeated, planting my feet. We stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills over a box of what he considered trash and I considered my soul. He was bigger and stronger, and we both knew it. I wouldn't be able to stop him if he decided to push past me. My eyes darted to my daughter, standing frozen in the doorway, my last hope. "Jessica," I pleaded, my voice breaking. "Please, tell him what this means to me." She finally looked at me. Her face was a canvas of misery and conflict. I saw the daughter I loved struggling somewhere in there, underneath years of her husband's careful programming. For a second, I thought she would speak up for me. For a second, I thought my girl was coming home. But then her expression collapsed into one of weary resignation. She took a breath. "Mom," she said, her voice impossibly tired. "Please, just stop. Stop being so difficult." She looked from me to the box in Mark's hands, to the rest of my beautiful, chaotic workshop. She shook her head, a gesture of profound, heartbreaking pity. "For once in your life," she sighed, "can't you just be normal?" And that was it. That was the final cut. The blow that severed the last fraying thread that connected us. Mark's cruelty was a blunt instrument. But my daughter's pity? That was a surgeon's scalpel, and it went straight to the heart. I stepped aside. I didn't have any fight left. I watched, numb, as Mark tossed the box of my beautiful mended things into the trash can with a sickening thud. They left soon after, patting themselves on the back for a job well done, for helping the crazy old lady. I didn't cry. I just stood in the doorway of my violated sanctuary, and I felt the silence of the house rush in to fill the space where my heart used to be. The door to my past had just been slammed shut and locked, and I was, for the first time, completely and utterly alone. I was, for the first time, completely and utterly alone. And in that profound, echoing silence, I discovered a strange kind of freedom. There were no more expectations to manage, no more hopes to be dashed. The part of me that had spent a lifetime listening for their footsteps, for their approval, simply withered and died. The loneliness was a cold, clean fire, and it burned away everything that wasn't essential. All that was left was me and the work. The garage became my universe. The 5 years that followed were a blur of discipline and discovery. I took the formula I had created, that quiet, earth-shattering eureka moment, and I treated it like the precious, fragile thing it was. I spent my meager savings on a patent lawyer, a kind man who saw the fierce, protective glint in my eye and didn't laugh at the old woman with a garage full of broken pottery. He helped me navigate the labyrinth of paperwork, and 6 months later, I owned my invention. I owned my gold. Success didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, quiet build. I started a small online shop. At first, I sold just enough to buy more supplies. Then, an influential art blogger from California stumbled upon one of my pieces. She wrote a post calling my work a stunning meditation on healing. Suddenly, the trickle of orders became a stream, then a flood. Small galleries from Santa Fe and Scottsdale started calling. The first time I saw one of my pieces displayed on a clean, white pedestal under a warm spotlight, I cried. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of validation, a quiet acknowledgement from a world that didn't know me, but saw the value in what I had created. The big break came from an unexpected place, a high-end architectural design firm. They didn't just want my art. They wanted my formula. They licensed it for an amount of money that seemed fake, a string of zeros that didn't compute in my mind. And through all of it, the patent, the blog post, the gallery shows, the life-altering deal, I never heard a word from Jessica or Mark. I had built an entirely new life, a successful one, in the silence they had created, which brought me to tonight, to the gallery, the champagne, and the 2 ghosts standing before me. I led them to a quiet alcove, away from the celebration. I watched as they took in the scene, the stark leather chairs, the polished concrete floors, the single, magnificent piece of my art hanging on the wall under its own spotlight. They sat down, shrinking into the expensive furniture, and the rehearsed performance began. Mark cleared his throat, the sound loud in the hushed space. He'd clearly been elected to speak first. "Mom," he started, the words still sounding alien and wrong. "I know it's been a while." He gave a weak, unconvincing smile. I said nothing. I just stood there, watching, letting the silence stretch. My stillness was a wall he had to climb. "Look," he said, abandoning the pretense of a family reunion. "We're in trouble. Really big trouble." He proceeded to paint a grim picture of financial ruin, a story I'm sure they had repeated to themselves in the car 100 times. He talked about his investment fund, the one that was supposed to be their ticket to the 1%. He used all the right words to make it sound like it wasn't his fault: unprecedented market volatility, a systemic collapse, a perfect storm. He was just a captain whose ship had been capsized by a rogue wave. He was a victim. Jessica, on cue, began to cry softly. It was a practiced, delicate sound. "We're losing the house, Mom," she whispered, her voice catching perfectly. "The bank sent the final notice last week. We have 30 days. I watched her, my face unreadable. I remembered the nights I had spent staring at my own ceiling, doing the grim math of a widow's finances, wondering how I would make the mortgage on a part-time librarian's salary. I remembered the quiet shame of using my credit card for groceries, praying it wouldn't be declined. The difference was, my struggle was quiet, it was solitary. I had no one to run to with a sob story and an open palm. "It's not for us we're asking," Mark said, leaning forward, his voice low and intense. He was playing his trump card now. "It's for Timmy. He's going to lose his home, his school, all his friends. He's just a little boy. He doesn't deserve to suffer because of all this." My grandson, the ace up their sleeve. They spoke of his suffering as if they were objective observers, not the architects of it. They presented their consequences as a tragedy I was now obligated to prevent. I thought of the box of toys I had kept in my closet for years, a model train set for his 5th birthday, a remote control car for his 7th, a telescope for his 10th. All of them collecting dust, presents never given to a boy I was never allowed to know. "We've lost everything," Mark said, his voice raw with a self-pity that was almost theatrical. "The 401k, the savings, everything we worked for, it's all gone. We have nowhere else to turn," Jessica added, looking up at me, her eyes pleading. "You're our last hope. We'll do anything. We'll pay you back, every cent, I swear it." This whole thing, it's been a wake-up call. We know what's important now. We know we made mistakes. All we want is a second chance. To be a family again. Family. There was that word again, a key to a door they had nailed shut. For 5 years, I was a ghost, an unmentionable secret. Now that their perfectly curated life had imploded, they had suddenly remembered my name. They had seen the articles about my success, heard the whispers of my good fortune, and had driven across 3 states not for a reconciliation, but for a bailout. This wasn't a plea for forgiveness, this was a business proposal. They were bankrupt, and they had finally identified a new asset. Me. Me. I was the new asset, the final, desperate long shot on a list of failed investments. I looked at their faces, a carefully composed tableau of hope and misery, and I felt a profound sense of distance, as if I were watching a play I had seen many times before. I knew all the lines. I knew how it was supposed to end, the tearful reconciliation, the grateful acceptance of my generosity, the restoration of a family that was, in reality, just a business arrangement. But I was tired of that play. It was time to write a new ending. I let their plea hang in the air, the silence in the alcove growing heavy and thick. Jessica watched me, her breath held, her practiced tears drying on her cheeks. Mark's eyes darted around, unable to settle, the confident financial advisor replaced by a desperate gambler waiting for the turn of a final card. Finally, I moved. I didn't answer their question. Instead, I said, my voice quiet but clear, "Let me show you something." I turned from them and walked to the wall behind their chairs, to the magnificent centerpiece that dominated the space. It was a large ceramic plate, shattered and reassembled, a chaotic and beautiful spiderweb of gleaming gold seams. I ran a hand over its surface, feeling the smooth, cool ceramic and the slightly raised lines of my work. They got up and followed me, their expressions a mixture of confusion and impatience. "This piece is one of my favorites," I said, speaking to the art, not to them. "The artist calls it The Hoarder's Gift. It's by a woman from a small town in Ohio, a woman whose family was ashamed of her. They said she was obsessed with garbage, that she lived in filth." I saw a flicker of unease in Jessica's eyes. Mark just crossed his arms, annoyed by the delay, by this pointless art lecture. "This woman," I continued, my voice steady, "spent years alone in her garage, surrounded by things other people had thrown away. She believed that anything broken could be mended, but she was never satisfied with just hiding the cracks. She wanted to make them strong, so she taught herself chemistry. She experimented. She failed hundreds of times, until she finally invented a new kind of golden bonding agent. An adhesive so strong, so brilliant, that it could make a shattered object stronger than it was before it ever broke. I paused, letting the story sink in. It turned out, a lot of people were interested in a formula like that. Museums that needed to restore priceless antiquities, designers creating indestructible countertops for million-dollar homes. It was a revolutionary invention, born in a dusty garage, surrounded by junk. I finally turned to face them. Their faces were blank canvases of incomprehension. "The garbage you told me to throw away, Mark. The junk you tried to help me clean up because I wasn't normal enough for you, Jessica. You're standing in the gallery it paid for. You're looking at the multi-million-dollar patent that hangs on this wall." The reveal was a quiet bomb, and the silence that followed was its shockwave. The color drained from Mark's face, leaving it a pasty, sickly gray. Jessica's hand flew to her mouth, and a ragged gasp escaped. The carefully constructed narrative of their victimhood, their bad luck, their blamelessness, it all disintegrated in an instant, burned away by the stunning, brutal truth. They hadn't come to beg a poor, lonely mother for a handout. They had come to beg for a piece of the very success they had mocked, shamed, and tried to throw in the trash. Mark was the first to recover, his mind, the mind of a failed investor, frantically trying to recalculate, to find a new angle. "Carol! Mom!" he stammered, a new, greasy awe in his voice. That's incredible. We had no idea. We're so proud of you. This changes everything. You can help us. It would be a drop in the bucket for you. It would be nothing." The sheer, breathtaking shamelessness of it was almost a work of art in itself. "Yes," I said, my voice dangerously soft. "It does change everything." I looked him square in the eye. "It changes my answer from a simple no to a profound, unequivocal, and eternal absolutely not." "What?" he sputtered, as if I'd just spoken in a foreign language. "What are you talking about? We're your family, your own daughter, your grandson." "My family," I repeated, and the word was ice. "My family decided 5 years ago that I was a problem to be solved, an embarrassment to be managed. You stood in my garage, and you called my life's work a sickness. You didn't want me when all I had to offer was a mother's love. Why on earth would you think I would want you now, when all you have to offer is a bill for your own failures?" I turned to my daughter. She was openly sobbing now, but these were not the crocodile tears of her earlier performance. These were the harsh, ugly tears of someone whose entire world has just been proven to be a lie. "You wanted me to be normal, Jessica," I said, my voice not unkind but firm as steel. "Well, this is me being normal. A normal person learns to protect what they've built. A normal person doesn't hand the keys to their peaceful home over to the very people who once tried to burn it to the ground. This life, this peace, this is the most valuable thing I own, and it is not for sale." That's when the man Jessica had chosen over me finally showed his true face. The mask of the concerned son-in-law, the failed but decent husband, it didn't just slip, it shattered. "You selfish bitch," he hissed, his face twisting into an ugly snarl of pure rage. He took a step toward me. "You get lucky. You win the lottery on some stupid glue, and you think you're better than us? You would let your own grandson become homeless just so you can sit here on your throne of garbage and gloat." He was shouting now, his voice echoing in the pristine gallery. People were starting to stare. "We were trying to help you. You were a pathetic, lonely old woman. That money should be for us, for your family. You owe us." I didn't flinch. I just stood my ground and looked past him, at my daughter. And I saw it, the final crack. She was staring at her husband, at this screaming, entitled stranger, and the look on her face was one of dawning, unadulterated horror. The poison he had been feeding her for 15 years had finally become visible. The perfect man, the perfect life, the perfect house, it was all a facade, and she was seeing the ugly, rotten truth behind it for the very first time. The perfect man, the perfect life, the perfect house, it was all a facade, and she was seeing the ugly, rotten truth behind it for the very first time. In that moment, watching the horror dawn on my daughter's face as she truly saw her husband, I wasn't thinking about money. I was thinking about debt. There are two kinds of ledgers in this world. There's the one they were obsessed with, the one with numbers and dollar signs, the one that tells you when your mortgage is due and your 401k is empty. That was the ledger they had brought to me, open and bleeding red ink, begging for a transfusion from my accounts. But as I stood there, I was looking at a different ledger, an invisible one, the one where the debts are tallied in units of time and trust, of missed moments and broken promises. A debt that can't be paid. As Mark began to sputter, his mind rebooting after the shock of my reveal, I started running the numbers on that other ledger. His renewed plea for a loan, for a drop in the bucket, was just static. The real accounting was happening inside me. I mentally drew up the invoice. Item: 12 Christmases. 12 years of waking up on Christmas morning to a silent house. 12 years of the ghost smell of cinnamon and pine, with no one to share it with. 12 years of watching other families on television, their homes filled with laughter and chaos, while I ate a small meal for one. What is the cash value of a Christmas morning? You can't put a price on it. It's unpayable. Item: 10 birthdays. My own, each one marked by a single candle on a cupcake I'd bought for myself. Each year, I'd make the same foolish wish for the phone to ring. Each year, it remained silent. How much for a daughter's voice singing, "Happy birthday"? Unpayable. Item: 1 grandson. This was the largest item on the invoice, the one that still made my chest ache. I had missed everything: his first steps, his first word, his first day of school, the first time he lost a tooth. I missed the scraped knees that needed a grandmother's kiss, the bad dreams that needed to be soothed, the silly, wonderful stories that only a 6-year-old can tell. They had stolen a decade of memories from me. They had stolen my chance to be a grandmother. They had stolen his chance to have one. What is the market rate for a grandson's childhood? There is none. It is a debt so colossal it is beyond the realm of currency. Unpayable, unpayable, unpayable. Mark was still talking, his voice regaining its confidence, now that he saw me as a potential business partner instead of a pathetic old woman. He was making promises. "We'll pay you back with interest. We'll sign anything you want. This will be a new start for all of us, Carol. For the family. The family." How easily he used that word now that it was a key to a vault. "You're asking me to help settle your financial ledger," I said, my voice cutting through his sales pitch. The calm in my own voice surprised me. It was the calm of absolute certainty. "And I've been looking at my own." They both stared at me, confused. "My ledger isn't about money," I explained. "It's about time. The invoice I'm holding has items on it that you can't afford. It lists every single holiday I spent alone. It lists every school play, every soccer game, every birthday party of my grandsons that I was never told about. It lists the nights I was sick and had no one to call. It lists the years of silence." I took a step toward them. They both instinctively recoiled, as if my quiet words were a physical threat. "You come here with your financial bankruptcy, a temporary problem that money can solve. But you too, you are morally bankrupt. You are emotionally bankrupt. That is a permanent condition. You are asking me to write you a check, but you can never pay the debt you already owe me. You can't give me back my grandson's childhood. You can't give me back the last decade of my life." Jessica let out a choked sob. "Mom, please," she whispered. "We're sorry. We were wrong. So wrong." "Yes, you were," I said. "And sorry is a down payment on a debt you can never repay. It's a gesture. But I am not a charity. And I am not a bank. I am the woman you threw away. The consequence of that decision is that I am no longer available to solve your problems. The consequence is that when your life fell apart, you had one less person to call. You made that choice, not today. You made it every day for 12 years. I looked at Mark, at his face, now turning from disbelief to a deep, ruddy shade of anger. He finally understood. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a verdict. "So, no," I said, the word landing with the finality of a gavel. "I will not give you one single penny, not because I can't afford it, but because you can't afford what you've already cost me." His face, the face of a man who had never been told no when it truly mattered, twisted into an ugly sneer. "You think you're so clever," he spat, "with your little story and your stupid broken plates. You're just a selfish old woman. You'd rather see your own grandson on the street than part with a dime of your precious money. He was sputtering now, his final, desperate attempt to shame me into submission, but I wasn't ashamed. I was free. My grandson is on the street because of his father's reckless gambling, not because of his grandmother's self-respect, I said. That is your failure to carry, not mine. And as he stood there, defeated and seething, my daughter looked at him. And in her eyes, I saw the final, brutal calculation being made. She was looking at the man she had sacrificed her own mother for, and she was tallying the cost. And her ledger, for the first time, was finally showing the same terrible, unpayable numbers as mine. Her ledger, for the first time, was finally showing the same terrible, unpayable numbers as mine. That understanding, that shared, silent accounting of loss, hung in the air between us. It was a moment of profound, tragic connection, and it was the last calm moment we would have. Because Mark, seeing he had lost not only the argument but his wife's allegiance, finally let the mask drop completely. It didn't just slip, he tore it off and threw it to the ground, revealing the raw, ugly face of his entitlement. "You know what?" he spat, his voice dripping with a venom that seemed to curdle the air. "You're pathetic. You were pathetic then, and you're pathetic now. You're just a lonely old woman who got lucky with some glorified glue. And now you sit here in your little palace of broken garbage and you have the nerve to judge me? Me?" He took a step forward, his chest puffed out, a caricature of wounded male pride. I didn't move. I wasn't his audience anymore. My eyes were fixed on my daughter. I was watching the cracks begin to form. It started as a small flinch, a barely perceptible tightening around her eyes when he called me pathetic. For 15 years she had listened to him use that word to describe me. She had nodded along, had perhaps even used it herself in the privacy of their perfect home. But hearing it now, in this gallery, surrounded by the undeniable proof of my success, the words suddenly sounded hollow. Ludicrous. The first crack. "I was the one trying to give Jessica a decent life," he raged, pointing a shaking finger at me. "A life away from this mess, this constant emotional drama. I was protecting my family from you." Jessica's head, which had been bowed in shame, slowly lifted. Her eyes were no longer on me, but locked on her husband. Her expression was one of dawning confusion, as if she were trying to solve a complicated math problem in her head. She was rereading the last 15 years of her life, and the numbers weren't adding up. I could almost hear the questions forming in her mind. Protecting me? Or isolating me? The second crack. "And what did you ever do?" he sneered at me. "You sat in your garage feeling sorry for yourself. You chose your junk over your own family, over your own grandson." He was weaponizing Timmy again, but it was a desperate, sloppy attack this time, and I saw Jessica's hands, which had been clenched in her lap, slowly unclench. Her breath hitched. I knew what she was remembering. She was remembering the times she had used her own son as an excuse, the PTA meetings I wasn't welcome at, the soccer games I was never told about. It hadn't been to protect Timmy from my drama. It had been to protect her husband's fragile ego from my very existence. The excuses, which had once seemed so reasonable, now tasted like lies. The third and deepest crack. "Mark," she whispered, her voice so small it was almost swept away by his tirade. "Stop." He didn't even hear her. He was completely lost in his own righteous fury. "You owe us. That money, that luck, it should have been ours. It's the universe balancing the scales for everything we had to put up with from you." And there it was, the final, unvarnished truth. Not a plea for help, but a demand for payment, a bill for their perceived suffering. He believed he was owed this. He believed my success was a cosmic debt to be collected by him. Jessica visibly recoiled. She physically leaned away from him in her chair, a small movement that was as final and definitive as a door slamming shut. The facade of her perfect marriage, of the strong, successful man she had sacrificed her mother for, didn't just crack. It shattered into a million pieces, revealing the grasping, insecure, and profoundly ugly man who had been hiding behind it all along. The man who hadn't protected her, but had imprisoned her in a cage of his own anxieties. He finally ran out of steam, his chest heaving, his face flushed. The silence he left behind was vast and terrible. He looked at Jessica, expecting her to join in, to back him up, to be his loyal partner. But the woman looking back at him was a stranger. Her face was a mask of horrified clarity. The spell was broken. She saw it all, the subtle manipulations, the carefully planted seeds of shame, the slow, systematic poisoning of her love for me. She saw that her life wasn't a partnership, it was a hostile takeover. "Let's go, Jess," he commanded, his voice strained, trying to reclaim his authority. He reached for her hand. She flinched and pulled her hand away as if from a hot stove. Without a word to him, without a glance at me, Jessica stood up. Her movements were stiff. Her face was ashen. She walked past her husband, her eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the gallery walls. She didn't storm out. She simply exited. She left the scene of the accident, the wreckage of her own life. Mark stood there for a moment, his hand still hovering in the air. He looked at her, retreating back, then at me. In his eyes, I saw a flash of pure, terrified panic. He had not only lost the money, he had just lost everything. He turned and hurried after her, a man chasing a ghost. I watched them go, a chasm of silence and broken trust now separating them. He had wanted to show me the cracks in my life, but in the end, all he had managed to do was illuminate the fatal, irreparable cracks in his own. He had wanted to show me the cracks in my life, but in the end, all he had managed to do was illuminate the fatal, irreparable cracks in his own. As he hurried out of the gallery after the ghost of the wife he thought he knew, a strange quiet descended upon the alcove. The distant sounds of the party, the clinking glasses and murmured laughter, slowly filtered back in, sounding like they came from another world. I stood there for a long moment, not in shock, but in a state of profound and final clarity. The war I had been fighting for 15 years, mostly inside my own head, was finally over. I didn't leave right away. I rejoined the party. I accepted congratulations from artists and collectors, my face a calm mask that betrayed nothing of the storm that had just passed. I smiled, I nodded, I sipped my champagne. It felt important somehow to claim this night as my own, to not let their chaotic desperation be the final word. But as I drove home later, through the quiet, sleeping city, I finally let myself feel the weight of it all. It wasn't the anger or the satisfaction of my victory. It was a deep, tectonic sadness for the daughter I had lost so long ago, and for the woman who had only just realized she'd been living in a house of cards. The weeks that followed were a quiet recalibration. I had proven to myself that I could face them, that their power over me was gone. Now, I had to decide how to live in that new freedom. My life in Santa Fe became my answer. I had bought a small, old adobe house with a separate workshop out back. The light in New Mexico is different, a clean, sharp, honest light that seems to burn away shadows. Every morning, I would wake up and watch the sun crest over the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, painting the desert sky in shades of impossible pink and orange. The air smelled of sagebrush and dry earth, a clean scent that felt like a fresh start. My workshop was no longer a cramped, dusty garage where I hid from the world. It was a bright, airy space with large windows that looked out onto a small garden I was cultivating. It was a place of creation, not just survival, and I was no longer alone in it. Twice a week, a group of women would join me. There was Maria, a retired teacher whose husband had recently passed away, who was mending the china they had received as wedding gifts 50 years ago. There was Sarah, a young veteran battling PTSD, who found a meditative peace in the precise, demanding work. We called ourselves the Kintsugi Club. We would sit for hours, working on our respective pieces, sharing stories, drinking strong coffee, and offering the kind of quiet, steady support that only comes from shared experience. We were a chosen family, a tribe of women who understood that healing is not about erasing the scars, but about learning to see them as part of our unique and beautiful history. This was the family I had built, not from blood, but from a shared understanding of what it means to be broken and what it takes to become whole again. It was during one of those quiet mornings, sitting on my patio with a cup of coffee, that the text message arrived. I saw the unknown number, and my heart gave a familiar, but faint, little squeeze. It was her. "Mom, I left him. I'm in therapy. I'm learning to fix things too. I hope one day you'll let me show you." I read the message, and I felt a wave of complex emotions wash over me. There was a profound sadness for the years she had lost, for the pain she was only now beginning to process. There was a flicker of pride in the courage it must have taken to write those words, to take that first, terrifying step away from the life that had been slowly suffocating her. But mostly, what I felt was a deep, abiding sense of peace in my own decision. I thought about what a yes would mean. It would mean opening the door, just a crack, to the chaos I had worked so hard to escape. It would mean taking on the role of healer, of savior, a role I had played my whole life and had finally retired from. Her healing was her journey, not mine. She had to find her own gold, her own formula for making herself strong again. Forgiveness wasn't a gift I could just hand her. It had to be the outcome of her own hard work. Trust, I had learned, must be earned, not given away freely to those who had already proven it worthless. So I didn't reply. I set the phone down on the table beside me, screen down. My peace was a fragile new garden. I would not allow the weeds of the past to choke it before it had a chance to truly bloom. Later that afternoon, in the warm, sunlit quiet of my studio, I sat at my workbench. I had a small, shattered porcelain bowl in front of me, its pieces laid out like a puzzle. I had spent the last week carefully cleaning each shard, preparing them for their transformation. I mixed a small batch of my golden lacquer, the formula that had changed my life, its scent now as familiar and comforting to me as the smell of baking bread. With a steady hand and a patient heart, I picked up my finest brush. I dipped it into the liquid gold and began to trace the broken edge of the first piece. It was a slow, deliberate act, a prayer, a promise. I was no longer mending to survive. I was creating out of a place of peace and strength. I was a testament to the fact that a life, shattered into 1,000 pieces, could be put back together. Not to hide the breaks, but to celebrate them, to make them the most beautiful, the most valuable, the strongest part of the whole. So let me ask you, if your life shattered into 1,000 pieces, would you have the courage to pick up the ones that truly mattered and build something even more beautiful? If this story resonated with you, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in the hardest of times.